Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And this week, we're coming at you with a brand new episode. We're going to be talking today about two brand new records and some other stuff. But the two records we're going to be talking about are, of course, the new sound by Geordie Greep of formerly Black Midi. Rest in peace. We're also going to be talking about the latest from death metal and prog metal stalwarts, their latest album from Blood Incantation. We're talking about Absolute Elsewhere.
Yeah, really excited to get to these two really, really interesting albums. But before we do, August, I see you're repping the MJ Lenderman merch today, and I know for a fact that you may have seen Mr. Lenderman in a professional capacity recently. Why don't you talk a little bit about what's up lately with you and MJ?
Me and MJ, we go way back. We're talking 2009, just before, oh, wait, other one. So MJ Lenderman is who you're referring to. And
This is like, are you implying that you started smoking weed at 7 years old, sir?
I thought he was implying that he killed Michael Jackson.
Oh, okay, yeah, that
yeah,
makes more
yeah, you
sense.
were a little more on point there, Riley.
Damn.
So yes, as of yesterday of this recording, I went to see Mr. Lenderman live, and I wanted to talk about a bit about that show. This is, of course, the tour for the much lauded album Manning Fireworks, which you can, of course, find a review for on this very podcast. Check it out again if you have not already. It's a great review. It's a great time. But this concert, so I went with my dad, who was incidentally the person who kind of introduced me to MJ Lenderman and got me interested in his music.
Likely thing
And
for a dad to do.
I think if my dad ever heard MJ Lenderman, he'd be okay with it until he said the line, "I got a houseboat docked at the Himbo Dome," and then blood would come out of his ears. Because that almost happened to me. What is what is Zoomer Vernacular doing in my fucking Whiskey Town album? What is happening?
That's
mhm.
prose, baby. Just the way it rolls off the tongue. Beautiful.
His opening act was Ryan Davis and the Roadhouse Band, who are kind of this alt country sort of sounding group, who all of their songs were super long, lengthy pieces. Like everything was seriously at least 5, 7 minutes long, and they were really good. A very fun front man in terms of just his kind of physicality and performance, as well as a really good guitarist at that. So I'll have to give their like proper albums a look sometime after this and report back on that later. But MJ was, of course, the highlight of the evening. They played him and his band, The Wind, played for 80 minutes. They played all of Manning Fireworks, but not in order because they ended up opening with Joker Lips, which I thought was a really great choice. And the show was closed with a three-part encore of Basketball Number Two, SUV, and Hangover Game, all from the
Nice.
Boat Songs album.
That's
And there was a
cool.
lot of boat songs. There was a lot of boat songs in here, and it kind of felt like for the older material, he was playing the best of the best, because of course you got Tastes Just Like It Costs in there. You Have Bought Yourself a Boat. One of my personal favorites, Toontown, was the first song they played, and kind of the first break in the Manning Fireworks songs they were playing.
It's so funny to hear
But
you say like older material about MJ Lenderman, who's like 25 years old. He's like,
oh
how
yeah,
does this man have old material? Who is he, Will Toledo?
no, exactly. He's already put out so much is the thing. That
Yeah.
he's like four albums, I think.
He already started off as like a
Don't
kind
quote.
of slowcore guy who was doing like Jason Molina worship stuff on his early stuff, like real kind of like Magnolia Electric Company. And it wasn't really until like Goes to Your Guitar Solo and then Boat Songs, especially where he became like, like faster tempos and more energy and more kind of like distinctive personality with all the references and stuff. So yeah, he's got a bit of an arc, but it's like it's hard to feel like, you know he's not still like just at the very beginning of his career. It's kind of crazy to think about how young he is. I know that's like kind of a moot point. Like everyone who talks about MJ Lenderman at some point in the last few years has been like, "Oh my God, this dude's young." But like, it's crazy. Like, imagine being younger than me and having written fucking "She's Leaving You." Like, what do I do?
Which I have to say, she's leaving you. Just the that kind of opening guitar part probably got the biggest crowd roar of the whole night because everybody knew what was coming. It was a really
Hell yeah.
electric moment.
Nice.
And I do not remember exactly where it is, but it was a little deeper in the set list where they were playing a transition between two songs. And MJ Lenderman just says something into the mic like that is the first time we've gotten that right. And it was just that was like a fun little thing to have them like nail something for the first time right in front of you.
Did they
Uh,
do much jamming? Like, did they do much like taking a song and then just kind of riffing on it? Like, I'm wondering, for instance, how they played Bark at the Moon, or if they did like
so
any kind of jamming in general.
with Bark at the Moon, they did something interesting that I like that I thought was cool was for that ending part, they did kind of leave that hanging for a little longer than I would have liked. Like just the that feedback they did for about 3 minutes, but kind of when that was wrapping up, they transitioned it into this massive sounding guitar solo that was probably the some of the most significant shredding because otherwise it was a lot of more straightforward just playings of the songs with no I remember notably there were a few where they like with when they ended Manning Fireworks, they riffed on that for a little bit, which was of course how they led into She's Leaving You. And like some of that, and that's basically how a lot of the just jamming ended up was it was in service of getting to the next song.
Interesting.
Uh
Because I could see the temptation, with a catalog that's, smaller than most like big touring rock bands would have, I suppose. Like, I would see the temptation to stretch out like big songs and like do like a 15-minute jam on one track, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. That can be really, really cool. But like, I also respect the restraint to not do that and actually give people like bang for their buck by actually playing as many songs as they can.
oh yeah,
That's,
like
I
in
respect both
total.
approaches, but definitely like it feels like what MJ's doing is more like, I guess, respectable, I suppose. Like the harder thing to do is to play more songs rather than just like do some just riff on a cool song and stretch it out to 10, 15 minutes. Like, I respect the hell out of that.
For the 80 minutes, they did play about 18 songs, so that should be a pretty
That's
good.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
No, that's epic, right? And
Mm.
that's kind of why I wasn't disappointed that there wasn't some longer jam session, just kind of for the reason you said, is that you got so much in there. It's like basically every song you would want to hear from him all in one show. So lastly, though, I did want to talk about this shirt, which of course they were selling there. MJ Lenderman in the Wind. Got the dates on the
I
back.
love when the merch shirts have the tour dates on them. Like that's super cool.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
But notably, the
Hey,
hey,
here we
notably
go.
though,
Oh, that made
the
my back hurt.
proceeds.
I threw my back out standing up.
Notably though, the proceeds for these shirts are going to be donated to help with the relief for Hurricane Helene as it hit MJ's hometown, Asheville, North Carolina, particularly
Yeah.
hard.
I love that it's a basketball as well, like
Oh yeah.
taking it right back to hangover game. Let's change tack a little bit from music temporarily and move into the world of gaming, as we sometimes do. You may not necessarily, not everyone may know this about this, but we are also gamers. I don't know why I said
That's
that
a
like it was
slur.
surprising. And Morgan, been a big week for Morgan because this week saw the release of a remake of Silent Hill 2, and our viewers may not know this, but Silent Hill 2 happens to be Morgan's favorite game. So Morgan, I'm going to throw to you. Talk a little bit about what Silent Hill 2 means to you, and then of course how this new remake has shaped up.
Yeah, I think if you'll recall before the hiatus, we actually discussed this remake a little bit. We discussed the fact that it was not on my most anticipated of the year list for video games, and that is notably because this remake was well, it's a Konami game for one thing, and they haven't made a real game since Metal Gear Solid 5 9 years ago. They contracted a Finnish developer, I don't know, somewhere in the Scandinavias, called Bloober Team to make this remake. And if you know anything about the history of Silent Hill, you know that the quality went straight off a cliff since Konami disbanded Team Silent and started outsourcing Silent Hill games to non-Japanese developers. I'm not saying that's not a coincidence. I'm not saying it is a coincidence, but And there was also the fact that frankly the footage that we were seeing of this remake looked like doo-doo. It looked bad. It looked like they made Silent Hill Homecoming with a Silent Hill 2 reskin. It's not
I remember you being especially salty about basically the whole vibe surrounding this at
yeah,
the
it
time.
just I mean from the outset remaking Silent Hill 2 is a bad idea because it's like remaking a David Lynch film. What is wrong with you? Why are you even doing that? What part of your brain said anyway? So
Literally,
yeah,
the only
so
issue with Silent Hill 2 is just that it's not as available as it should be,
Mm.
and
yeah.
remaking a game because of a lack of availability. I don't know. It's like rebuilding a house because there was like a landslide in front of your driveway. Like it's just fucking deal with that problem. Don't like throw the whole thing out. But evidently, this is how the gaming industry works.
At least when you're working with the single most inept entity in the entire industry. So property very near and dear to my heart, Silent Hill 2. I try and play through at least once a year. Uh, one of the single most valuable experiences I've had with art. So I was gonna play this remake pretty much no matter what. Uh, Especially that I spent the 2 weeks previous to this playing through all of the other Silent Hill games, which was the greatest indemnification that I have way too much time on my hands that I could ever imagine. But anyways, the embargo lifts, right? And it's like an 87 out of 100 on Metacritic. And for scale, an 80, it doesn't quite work the same way as movies. If you get an 80 on Metacritic, that's kind of like, that's good. If you get like a 75, it's like nobody's gonna buy that,
There's a
probably.
big
Just
curve.
just because it costs $70 for a 75 out of 10. Uh, and if you get a 60, you may as well get a 1 out of 10. Um, like at that point, it's like the Metacritic works on the American school system's grading system.
Uh-huh,
If
sure does.
if you get if you get less than a 65, you will be held back.
You're
But
Sonic 2006.
yeah. But also if you score above a 92, let's say, you are God. You you own it. This has happened recently with Astrobot and Baldur's Gate 3 and Metaphor ReFantazio has a 94. So, you know, these are games you're going to be hearing about for the next 5 to 10 years. That's what a 94 or whatever means on Metacritic. So an 87 is more than respectable, not to mention so much higher than I was anticipating. You know, the the game itself started to look better and better in various gameplay videos that uh Bloober Team was releasing, but nobody, least of all me, wanted to get their hopes up about this thing. All that said, I've finished the remake now once. About a quarter of the way through a New Game Plus run. Um, all right, so here's the thing about this game is that it is not Silent Hill 2 from a game perspective. It makes if you were to look at the differences in the original games, like it would make the it would make Final Fantasy VII Remake look paltry in how much it changes from the original compared to this. This is just
Oh
not the
wow.
same game. It's not, it's like, it's so different that you can like see little pieces, like little mementos of like old puzzles and various set pieces in the game. And you can click on them and a little like music cue happens just because it's literally like a moment of like, hey, remember when that was the game? Because it's not that game at all now. And the game is fantastic. It is not counting PT because that's like a weird thing in and of itself. It is the best Silent Hill game since 3. So 20 years.
Damn.
Uh just absolutely stepping up to the plate and knocking it out of the park. And I, for one, couldn't be happier with the game. The only quibble I have with it is that it is a little too combat heavy. They're
Huh?
like And not actually, it's way too combat heavy. There are maybe like, and Riley can attest to this, having just played it, there are maybe like 70 enemies in Silent Hill 2 maximum. And my stats by the end of the remake were that I killed 321 enemies. So there's too many. And combat is really interesting. It's really tense. They've done a really good job of it by making it kind of shit. Um,
Well,
you
that's not
know,
very, that
like
doesn't sound very different.
Yeah, it's just bad in an entirely different kind of way from the deliberate mess of mechanics that the original game was. Um, but even then, it starts to feel a little tiresome when you've killed your 15th mannequin on this floor of the hospital, you know. So that's the only problem with the game itself. The remake is the story and narrative in the remake, I think, is all really well done. Um, it's considerably more Hollywoodified, is
Mm.
a way to put it, than the original, which, like, to be frank, I don't really care. Like, you're trying to remake the exact insane way that the narrative was produced in the original game would be the worst thing they could do because that is the definition of lightning in a bottle. You cannot replicate how Silent Hill 2 was made because they were so crazy that they casted the game based on like the people closest to the character models that they could find, which is I like,
That was actually common practice, believe it or not.
That's crazy.
brother, what? And it turned out the way it did, and it's one of the most singular pieces of art ever. Um, and this wisely decides to, what if James Sunderland, instead of sounding like an alien, sounded like the single most broken human being you can imagine. Just an absolute shell of a person.
You sent
Apt.
Cool.
you sent like a picture of the gameplay at one point in Discord, and I just noted that James's idle animation in the remake, he looks like he's about to cry. Like
Uh-huh.
he's just this standard face. It just looks so disheveled and broken. So that's that's interesting to like really like highlight that and forecast that. Whereas when you do play the original, like it has that turn of the century PlayStation style where it's very flat and there's not really much that's dynamic about the character animations or models at all. And then you have the voice acting in those original games, which is a significant step up into, I would say, from one, which has some of the most hilarious voice acting, like inappropriately hilarious voice acting of any game. And I'm sure a lot of games from the 90s were like that I haven't played. Um, but two is a significant step up. But what's always interesting is that in both games, the worst VA is the protagonist. Or like the
Yeah.
most lifeless VA is the protagonist, and you get a lot of um the and especially this is especially true for two, you get a lot of the supporting characters having much more animated VA, like in terms of the charisma and the emotion and the performances. And that ends up working in the favor of two because of the like dissociative, strange, like disconnected from reality nature of James as a protagonist. Like it makes it doesn't he feels off because his sense of the world is off. His memory is gone. Like he doesn't really have much tangible to hold on to. So it makes sense that he's kind of a bit weird. Um, so it's interesting and not surprising at all that they would go in a direction that maybe I suppose would it be fair to say that the remake goes for a slightly more realistic approach to things? And insofar as you can make that material feel realistic in any way, it's so like surreal.
I mean, the script itself is incredibly faithful. It just comes down to how it's performed. And I think more grounded is the way to say it, which, you know, that will be up to the player's personal interpretation of how they feel about that. If they were going to bother with this at all, I'm all for it, just because you can't, like, just trying to replicate their performances in the original game is folly. So I'm perfectly all right with how it turned out. Um, and it's just interesting to see those cutscenes, which I've seen literally hundreds of times, but different with a completely new tactic approaching it. I think this is best exemplified in Angela, who is my favorite character in the game, one of my favorite characters in fiction, who, and the performance, frankly, is at times just flatly better than the original. And then there's times where it's not, so it's just really interesting that it's like the best case scenario for how it could have turned out in terms of like trying to remake the very singular and particular nature of the original Silent Hill 2's narrative.
Mm.
And so yeah,
Yeah.
I could be happier with it, but I'm very happy with what we have.
Yeah, it's interesting for the full for our viewers full reference. I played the original Silent Hill 2 like literally within the last 48 hours of us recording this for the first time. I played it in two sittings, 4 hours apiece. I couldn't stop playing it. It was just it sucked me in completely. So I have a very sort of fresh memory of that game uh, and fresh feelings about it. One of the things that was a dominant takeaway for me was how little the mechanics really mattered at all in that game. Like you have a standard format that was established by the first game of you walk along streets, kill enemies, or avoid them completely, as the case may be. But mainly you go into buildings, you get a map, you navigate various floors of buildings in a non-linear linear order, you unlock and find things, and eventually you find your way out. Um, and so that's fine. That's taken basically wholesale from the first game and replicated in these environments. But really, the mechanics of what you're doing matter less than ever. Combat is way more avoidable in Silent Hill 2 than it is in Silent Hill 1. It's not a surprise to me that with the remake they would up the ante with combat because there's so many generations have elapsed of gaming since that game came out, and there's an expectation now for what a game will deliver that's way different to what it was in 2001. I mean, and also like the combat in those first two Silent Hill games is ridiculously simple. Like it's a system that's so, one note basically, because that was as advanced as it could be at that point in time. So it doesn't surprise me at all to hear that they've upped the ante with combat for this, because if you were to replicate the combat of that original game and not really do anything else with it, it would feel to a new player who has no connection or relationship with the original woefully undercooked. So that doesn't surprise me. But one of the things I like so much about Silent Hill 2 is how basically optional the combat is, to the point that like the first major boss encounter, you basically just need to avoid getting hit and it will end. You know, you don't really have to have much. And in fact, the one of the things about Silent Hill 2's combat is that it always feels wrong. Like, and what I mean by that is that you always feel like you shouldn't be killing anything. And especially the central combat encounters, they either feel like impossible or like you don't want to do them. So there's like, it's really interesting how subversive Silent Hill 2 is in terms of its approach to combat. That's one of the things that was unique about that game to me, is how like little it matters and then how just wrong it feels in a way that's not like, like it's any kind of commentary on gaming, but just more like it feels like almost in opposition to the narrative that's happening, um, in a way that works. So yeah, I have to imagine that it's not surprising to me that that element will be changed dramatically, because how would you get someone in the PS5 generation in 2024 to sit down and play Silent Hill 2 replicated to that engine and that world, and have a satisfying experience with it? It is like what so much of what makes Silent Hill 2 the original game work is tied into the point in time in which it was made, and the limits of that system. So yeah, I am curious about this remake. I'm curious to see like what it adds and what it does differently for myself. I'll probably will go back and play the original Silent Hill 2 at least a couple more times to get more endings um first. But I definitely will be playing the PS5 version eventually. My next my next goal is just Silent Hill 3, though. I'm going to play that next. So I'm really looking forward to that. But yeah, this just happened to dovetail really, really nicely. The whole hubbub around Silent Hill was exactly the kick in the butt I needed to finally play the original games. So yeah, I've been really enjoying that experience.
I think that's at the end of the day, the coolest thing about this game is that you mentioned that it's kind of difficult to like get somebody who's used to more refined, more contemporary game mechanics in modern video games, and you give them Silent Hill 2. That's kind of a big ask. So at the end of the day, the nice thing about this is that whatever way you feel about this remake, which people are weird about, frankly, this is gonna get more people to appreciate Silent Hill 2. Like point blank, period. Like that's just what this will do, and I don't see how that's not a victory for Silent Hill fans who have been, let's face it, kicked while they were down for more than the last 15 years.
Totally, totally. And if you have that hankering to play the original, then the enhanced edition mod makes it easier than ever to have that experience. Although you have to have a copy of the original game or be willing to pirate it, so your morals may dictate how you experience this. But yeah, one of the original Silent Hill 2 is just, yeah, one of the best gaming experiences I've had. Alrighty. Jake, I noticed when I was just perusing Rim before that you listened to that Animal Collective live album. I know you were kind of talking
Oh,
about how you were looking forward to it last week, and I was wondering if you wanted to like talk about that.
yeah, I actually have had this on my radar for a while now. They had it on their Bandcamp for a pre-order, but there is a new Animal Collective live album that is basically the entirety of their album Sung Tongs that is performed live. And this was really interesting to me just because I really dig Sung Tongs. I've become a really, really big Animal Collective fan over the last couple of years, to the point where I would consider them like a top three of all time band at this point. And I really dig Sung Tongs, but it's also just not my particular favorite flavor of their sound. So I was interested to see if the live version of this was at all transformative, or if these songs were just basically like changed in any way that would make the experience different enough for me to come back to one over the other. And much to my surprise, listening to this is a very transformative album to the point where it feels like a borderline new experience almost. These songs are elongated and transformed in some instances by like twice their original length, and everything is mic'd so beautifully. Like, I don't know how they were able to get this quality in terms of recording equipment and the fact that the band sound incredible live. Like, Animal Collective are a very strange band to witness in any capacity live just because their music is so singularly odd. So they're going to be doing some weird, wacky shit instrumentally and vocally. And especially with their earlier freak folk stuff, I was just like, I don't know how that's going to translate to a live setting and still like, is that going to have the same sort of psychedelic effect on me that it would on the album? And the answer is yeah, somehow. The way that this manages to turn all of these Animal Collective songs into like kind of chamber music versions of themselves, the reverb of the venue, everything makes this sound so full. And they play with that too, in the way that it's echoed and the way that all of the like sound mixes together. It's really full sounding, and it makes me feel like I am getting a new experience. Even if these songs were the same, I would still be like, yeah, this is definitely worthwhile. But this, on the other hand, I like, if you like Animal Collective in any capacity, this should be considered a must listen. But even if you aren't that big into sung tongs, you've got to check this out anyway. They do the whole thing, and then they actually end it with a couple of like encore songs too that are absolutely fantastic. Like the rendition of Prospect Hummer on here is amazing. Sea of Light is beautiful. I remember learning how to dive. The penultimate track on here is fucking transcendent. Like, oh my God. And like again, there's just moments on here. Covered in Frogs is another moment on here that I was really kind of astounded at how well the sound is all just layered here. So if you're an Animal Collective fan in any respect, I would highly recommend checking this out. It's more than worth your time and feels like it doesn't feel like just a live album of another album that you like.
That's so cool. Because I saw that you gave it like a really high score, and I was like, damn, I know that's an Anchor album that Jake like has a bit of a ceiling for. So to see that kind of it click in that way is really, really awesome. Like they're obviously an amazing live band. I think maybe the key, and I haven't heard this yet. I wasn't, to be honest, it wasn't on my radar as much as it maybe should have been, and now it totally is. But the thing that's interesting to me is like that album originally was just Avi Tier and Panda Bear. Like it was a two-person album.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't even know if it was actually initially released under the Animal Collective label in 2004. It may have been, but I'm not quite sure. I wasn't cognizant at the time. But it obviously was like, well, not obviously at all. You may or may not know this, but it was one of the albums that really blew them up initially. So you know, it's always kind of been an important one to me. Um, but to see
And
like
you
the prospect of them transforming it in this way, like actually giving a kind of full band, you know, re-envisioning of these songs in the current era is so awesome. Because one of the things about that original album is that it is so limited by its technology. Like it's an acoustic
Mhm.
album, you know, there's some effects and stuff that are kind of played around with, some synthetic stuff, but it is very like centrally acoustic. So, you know, there's so much potential for that material to be expanded on, which and it's really cool that they did that.
and you do feel the presence of the other members here. There's lots of instrumental flourishes that, you know, you will really get along with. I know that like Zach, for instance, one of the things he kept bringing up when you talked about some like Anco like side projects and stuff, he was very aware of the fact that he wanted the presence of the other Animal Collective members when he didn't feel them. Whereas this is like a dream scenario where I would argue that you basically get that. It's like a redo of what it would have been like if Geologist had been in the band too with them.
Nice. That's so cool. I'm really excited to check that out.
I had a bit of music sent to me in the recent weeks, and I promised that I would shout it out just because this is an independent artist who is completely out there on his own, making his own shit, and we just like happened to have an interaction, and then he DM'd me. And the music that I would like to shout out is mainly a single. This is available on streaming, at least it is, I know, on Apple Music. This is from a rapper who goes by the name of Nardi Global. I'll probably tag him in the title of this just to send people his way. But this guy's a rapper, and he sent me this song, and it is called Love You Forever. This song is about his mother, who is currently dying of stage 3 breast cancer. And it is exactly as heavy as that sounds. And yet, like, this is something that, like, it was sent to me, I experienced it, and I was just like, God, I've never been more aware of the fact that so much great, heartfelt, beautiful, cutting shit is being made by people all over the place, and there's just no signs pointing their way. Like, this is such a beautifully written song. It's a very well produced one too. Like, this is something that I would expect to hear off of a, maybe not like a big expensive hip hop project, obviously, but somebody along the lines of like a Mach-Hommy or Griselda, like something that just sort of like not in that style, but of that quality level. But in terms of just like the production is a very like nice sounding beat and everything. But the real star of the show here is Nardi himself and the lyricism. It's very beautiful. Go check it out if you think you can handle that. It is a powerful piece of work, but he's got other stuff out there too that I would recommend checking out. So go send some love his way.
That's awesome. That's super sick. I can't wait to check that out too. I know also that one Mr. Susumu Hirasawa has a new release out as well. Jake, maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Those of you who have been paying attention for a while know that myself and Riley are really, really big fans of Japanese composer and art pop musician Susumu Hirasawa. I made a video about his entire discography a little while back, and Riley helped edit that. And honestly, that's probably the thing that we've made on this channel that I'm the most proud of to this day.
It's a beautiful
And
video.
it really all came together at the last minute too. It was a real labor of love. And so I've kind of been on the like watching sort of from a distance because Hirasawa still is very active, still makes music and all of that. But I was like, when is his next like album gonna come out? Because his last record, Beacon, was 2021, and he does release every like 3, 4-ish years. And so we had the new albums that was teased like a month or so ago. It was technically out in Japan on CD a while ago, but now it is on his Bandcamp. I'll put a link for that in the description. This new album, which is called The Book of Phytoelectrons. And if you look at the cover of this album, it looks like a science textbook. It looks like you're about to go learn some fucking chemistry. And the entire thing conceptually is Susumu Hirasawa going through the musical life cycle of a germinating plant, which is the most nerd shit Susumu Hirasawa ass concept ever. But the way that this sort of translates into the experience of the album is that this is a very different sound. I would say that if you are looking for the immediate, operatic art pop extravaganza that a lot of his other music is, you're probably not going to quite get that. There are moments on here that will satisfy Kurosawa fans who perhaps are looking for something a little bit more like his original stuff. But what I like about this is that it is a very intentionally sort of, I wouldn't call it stripped back, but it is a more relaxed ambient pop post-rock inclined album, but like with a combination of his sort of new agey atmospheres, and also like a math rock style guitar sort of thing. Like he's actually referred to this as his second guitar album, the first of which being his live record Ice 9. And I love that album primarily because it showcases what an excellent guitar player and what a unique guitar player he is. And on here, that's basically like the baseline instrument is the guitar and the synth that sort of make out the bed of the atmosphere. So everything here is just like a wash of raw beauty. And it sounds fucking fantastic. Like you can never go wrong with his production, but the way this particular wall of sound that he's able to build layers itself. It's never been more coherent. Like, if you dig the vibe of something like the Berserk soundtrack, this basically gives you the Guts theme for like 40 straight minutes. And frankly, I don't have a better endorsement for the album than that. Go check this out. It is a little bit on the, like, you might need to exercise your sense of patience a little bit more than you do with something like Technique of Relief, for instance. But I genuinely think this is his best album since White Tiger Field. It's a new direction. It's got some fucking stunning tracks on it. Like, they're all in Japanese, so it's a little bit difficult to tell what is which, but there is one song on here called excuse me if I just have to look at the entire title of this, which is long. It is In the Field of Floating Flowers. Okay, yeah, that's right. This is one of Susumu Hirasawa's best songs, and frankly, there's like two others on here that I would put right alongside it. A fantastic release that like just edged into my top 20 of the year, and I couldn't be more thrilled with it. I may even talk about it in my own video on it in the future, just because Susumu Hirasawa is my guy, he's my dude, and I want to shout him out in every possible way that I can. So go check this out.
Is this one on streaming? Because I know a lot of his aren't.
It is not, but it is on his Bandcamp. That's the only
Okay.
way I know
Yeah,
that like you can access it easily. I do think that some people have it on SoulSeek right now, but I'm not totally sure.
that's fine. I'll go to Bandcamp for it. I'm more than willing to throw a few dollars his way. And that sounds, you've really done a good job of selling it too. By the way, for anyone looking to get into him, I know that the albums Technique of Relief and Siren were recently just put on streaming. I noticed that. I was like, what?
Yep.
I'm a
Two of
little
his
sad.
best too. Like
That,
those
that
are the ones you want to go to.
those are like I think literally my two favorites of his. Uh,
It's mhm.
I've listened to Sirens so much this year, dude. So yeah, go and check that out. That looks really good. I will say I hate how much the album cover made me think of Biffy Clyro, A Celebration of Endings.
Oh my God, it totally does look like that.
It's the same like white backdrop with just like random shit on it. Um, but you
It's
know,
weird seeing a new Susumu Hirasawa album cover that isn't black and white, frankly. I was just like, wait, what?
actually, you know what? Million points to Susumu because this one actually has a picture of him holding a
Mhm.
guitar that is literally bigger than he is.
It's
Like,
so good. I love it.
like what is bro doing? It's like he's
And you know what? It sounds like he's playing a guitar that big.
that's yeah, that rocks. Okay, that's cool as
Biffy
shit.
Clyro, absolutely haram.
They don't exist anymore, I don't think. No, they do, but like
No.
not to us. Um, anyway,
We
Liffey
canceled Biffy
Byro.
Clyro.
yeah.
Finally.
That's a throwback.
Well, I missed the throwback, August. What was the throwback?
Liffey Byro, more like.
Yeah, there we go. Flippy Byro. I
Real
don't,
ones, remember.
I don't even know if
Well,
it's a
hey,
throwbacks as much as like, isn't that where they got their name from? Like,
I think it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
yeah,
Well,
guess
we
it's.
told the
I
story
just.
on the
it
show.
was a Cliff
Yeah,
Richard
yeah,
pen. Yeah, anyway.
yep.
Um,
Hmm.
do you guys
I can't
do you
believe
guys
that.
know the word biro in America? Is like, do you know what
No,
that is? That it's just
have
that's a
Hell
never
no.
heard it used before.
that is just a British word for like a ballpoint pen. Anyway, so
Huh.
there's
Just call it a pen. It's a fucking pen.
I mean, that's a yeah. But
This is a pen.
the pen is blue.
The
Anyway,
goddamn pen is blue.
yeah.
Wow, you just reached into the furthest, darkest corner of my mind, Riley, and
Thing you have to
grabbed that.
know, I think this is
I
true for
didn't
both.
even know what movie that was from when I started speaking.
Yeah. The thing you have to know is that the movie Lara Lara starring Jim Carrey like exists. It's like a fucking point and a milestone in my early life was seeing that movie.
Yes, me too.
I've seen it probably 20 times. I want to say, and most of those times were
Oh, more.
between the ages of 5 and 8.
Hmm.
Anyway. Anyway.
I love that we
Anyway.
have this one overriding connection between the two of us for specifically early Tom Shadyac movies. Like,
Well, yeah.
what?
Yeah. I was a fan of that movie at such a young age that I thought that the main character was Ace Ventura because I didn't understand the concept of acting, like that a guy could be different characters in different movies. I was like,
War is
I was like,
hell.
like Ace Ventura is a lawyer now, I guess, in this one, so that's cool. Um, and he doesn't seem to like animals at all. Okay, let's get into some reviews. Let's start with Blood Incantation, new album from this. Hang on, what country are they from?
They're
Denver,
from Denver,
Colorado.
I was
the
thinking,
country of
which
Denver.
Scandinavian country are these guys from? They're just from Denver.
No, it's an Agalloch thing where it's like you think
Ugh.
they're European, but surprise.
Yeah, so anyway, new album from the Colorado-based death metal band Blood Incantation. I feel woefully ill-equipped to talk about this band. So I'm gonna throw out there, Jake, maybe do you want to do a little bit of a Blood Incantation intro
Yeah,
and talk about this
I
band and this
know
album?
a little bit about them, so I can do that. Blood Incantation are a Denver death metal, progressive metal, but also like classifying them is kind of a fool's errand because from the get-go, these guys have been synthesizing a lot of different genres together. And honestly, it's very rare we see a metal band catch on like this to the degree that they have, because 2016 Star Spawn was an album that like that was actually pretty big. Like that made waves and like that put them into certain metal scenes where people were like, "Oh, hey, these are people to watch out for." They blend death metal, prog metal, but also like space rock and ambient passages and like all this other stuff together. But also, and you know, they'll sprinkle a little bit of like tech death, you know, every once in a while. But then it was Hidden History of the Human Race that really like cemented them as a band to look out for. That's a particularly beloved metal album from like the end of that decade. And so people have been like, okay, we're on the Blood Incantation train. Let's see where it goes. They did actually put out an EP that is album length in 2022 that I did talk about on the show called Time Wave Zero. And I was kind of disappointed because that album was just sort of a weird electronic ambient experiment. And I was like, this is nifty, but it doesn't do much for me. And little did I know that would presage where they would go afterwards, because now we are sitting here with 2024's Absolute Elsewhere. And the cool thing about it is that even though I wasn't a big fan of Time Wave Zero, they put a lot of things forward in their sound that had very much been on the peripheral. And now with this new album, it kind of feels like there is an attempt to bridge the gap between every stylistic flavor that they've dabbled in and then condense it and then create a monolithic record, which Absolute Elsewhere undoubtedly is. It's structured in two songs that are split into three parts, but it is two primary big movements. And thankfully, this album seems to be getting a whole lot of play with everybody. This is a record that it feels like, you know, the scene was primed to receive well. And we are in the midst of a bit of a, I don't want to say a metal revival, but it does sort of feel like there are a lot more mainstream metal records that have been released in the last 2 years that feel like they matter. And now, Absolute Elsewhere, people are really digging the shit out of this. So, what do we think about this?
It's good.
All right, that's been this episode of the Jams T Podcast. Hit like, subscribe, hit the bell.
Hit the bell, kill yourself. Fuck you, goodbye.
But not before you hit the bell. That's the important
Hit the
thing.
bell, kill yourself is great.
Finally, someone gives me my two favorite instructions.
August, do you want to jump in on Blood Incantation because you're a
Oh
bit of a
yeah.
metalhead
Okay.
out there, aren't you?
Oh, I suppose I'm a bit of one. Um, so I guess perhaps
You
the
know, I'm something
weirdest
of a
thing,
metalhead myself.
yeah, perhaps the weirdest thing
Morgan's
about
currently more of a
Absolute,
Fred Durst looking metalhead than
Yeah.
the most stunning thing about this album is that this almost has more DNA with like Pink Floyd than most traditional metal you would think of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like the synthesizer work here, I think is something to behold, especially when it's integrated into Stargate Tablet 2, which
Oh,
has one of the members of Tangerine Dream on that song. And yeah, this album's kind of separated into two kind of major songs with individual sub tablets in that. And the Stargate's first half had a lot more of the kind of, I suppose, Berlin school progressive electronic sound, and the second
mhm.
half build a little more into that kind of raw, like death metal sound you'd want, all while stringing it together with something a little more progressive metally. I would say that I really find myself enjoying the Stargate in particular, that whole passage of tracks. I really love the kind of grim lyrics kind of describing consciousness after death on tablet one of the Stargate in a very mortifying way, speaking to it almost as though all of the physical sensations of life have drained away, but only the bleeding memory and ability to think remain. It's a bit of a grim, horrifying prospect. I love those parts of the record where the lyrics are very appropriately death metal, appropriately sci-fi, appropriately nerdy, and I dig the shit out of it in that sense. And like I said, the message, the kind of second half of this album has some of the more death metally and kind of brutal progressive parts. The message tablet 3 in particular needs to be beheld with just how fierce, intense, and pummeling that track is. So I really just get such a visceral, fun kick out of this, and that would be how I'd start off this discussion. What else do you
Yes.
guys feel like is worthy to add about this record?
It's always really fun when a band drops the lead single for their album and it's half the album. It's
And you know
just always,
what? Clearly it worked for them.
yeah. And I just respect as well how fucking balls in the paint, over the top it is, like prog heady it is to like
Mhm.
have your song, not just have your song split into subsection tracks, but call them tablets, like you're fucking
Tablets.
Moses coming down the mountain with this music.
Uh-huh.
Like
It is
that's
a
just so
very
over the top to me.
Rush feeling stylistic
Oh
choice.
yeah.
Like I could see them doing that.
Like my like, dude, do a whole Ten Commandments concept album next. I want to hear every song like that.
Fuck
No,
yeah.
it's cool. It's fun as fuck. It's really theatrical. It's really silly. But really well performed and well recorded as well. Like I was consistently pulled into the theatricality of it and the pomp and circumstance of it. At the best, biggest moments of it were sold to me with the kind of gusto and passion and tongue-in-cheek sense of playfulness that a Ghost record would have, for instance. Like it was a really fun experience. I think the second time through it, I appreciated the sophistication and the musicality a little bit more than I did the first time. And I think it's a credit to the band that that sort of stuff is a little bit disguised, or at least that you're not as overwhelmed by that as a primary factor of the album because it's just so much fun to listen to. Yeah, that element prevails. It's interesting to hear August talk about how like gruesomely dark these lyrics are because I really wasn't picking up on that energy at all. I was just having a great
Oh,
time with it. But that fits the bill for this kind of band, so I'm not too surprised. I like this. If it's a trend, I don't know if it is a trend, but if it is a trend, I like this idea of infusing like progressive electronic influences into death metal, and kind of, sprinkling some Pink Floyd on top of that as well. I think that's a really cool combination. It's very 70s, and I'm a big fan of that. It's not necessarily doing anything super innovative, but it is combining influences that I like in a way that makes me happy. So fuck, I guess that's all that matters.
I appreciated how sort of light on its feet it is. It's a progressive record, but it clocks in at about 45 minutes, and
Hmm.
not a moment of it feels wasted or superfluous. the shame of it is, and this is not a knock on the album at all, is that I am sort of at capacity with how much death metal I can like personally absorb right now. It's just so I go through swings and roundabouts with extreme music where I'm into certain subgenres more than others at any given time. And so the more death metal-y parts of this they didn't wash over me. The musicality is impressive enough, and as I say, the album propels itself forward in enough moments that I was gripped throughout listening to it, but I was much less compelled by them than I was compelled in the ways that they interacted with the more progressive electronic elements of it.
Yeah, it was nice to hear all
Yeah.
these 70s influences and metal sounds smashed together by a band that aren't called King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard.
Hmm.
The Wizard
Well,
Lizard.
that's the remarkable thing about it is that you just don't see people who are this ridiculously versatile all do everything as well as they do without like sacrificing anything. I think that's kind of the miracle of this is that all of these elements that you throw in there that we've mentioned, they're all here, but they don't feel like they exist at the sacrifice of one another. And in fact, there's almost like a this is in fits and starts. It's so progressive that it almost feels a bit avant-garde in its song structures occasionally. The way that they kind of bob and weave in and out of these passages is just like it's really skillful. You don't really notice just how much they're doing until you like really sit down and give this a couple of listens. And like I don't know. There is something about this album that really pulled me in a way that other death metal albums recently haven't. And I think it's mainly because of the writing. You actually mentioned a little bit of the horror basically that happens in a track like the Stargate. And what I love about this album is that of all the things it ended up reminding me of, it's Death, the original founders of death metal. Go check out our video on that and not just in how it's a progressive death metal album because yeah there is definitely a bit of like individual thought patterns and symbolic on here in places like again if you're a big fan of those proggy death records gonna feel right at home here but the interesting thing is that it echoes Schuldner's writing ethos really strongly the way that this the first half of it on the Stargate is very much like you could very well convince yourself that it's just like, oh, this is just normal death metal lyrics. But it uses its sort of binary halves in order to showcase some contrast. Because once you go from the Stargate to the message, you have a kind of narrative happening where the main character is inundated by horror, like describing how just like painful it is to be alive and how like he doesn't understand the vastness of the universe and feels infinitely small in the face of it. So approaches something like the Stargate in order to funnel all of the universe's knowledge into him. And once that happens, the second half of this album's writing is straight up just fucking gorgeous. Like there are parts of it where it reminded me of, again, the writing on Symbolic, where Chuck Schuldner will talk about how beautiful nature is. And that happens on here. And the prose for it is remarkably effective. And ultimately, it becomes an album where the thematic machinations of it are that this character realizes the beauty of the universe once it's poured into him. And it's not that, oh, everything's beautiful, now my life is better. He discovers that the ultimate sort of the pinnacle, the paragon of existence is the ability to create, is the ability to share, the ability to just sort of, put yourself into something and then have someone else experience you through it. And I just think that's fucking beautiful. Like, there's a bit of harmony with how they're combining all these different things that they clearly love and making that sort of synergistic with the album have been like, this is our purpose. This is what we're building towards. And I find that synergy to be really compelling. It feels like these guys have something to really prove. Like they want to leave their mark on the metal scene. And I am so glad that this album came out because I had only just heard of them before. Now I want to explore their entire fucking discography because these guys they're something special. And if this album is any indication, they're gonna be here for a while. And we should be grateful that people this adventurous are at the forefront of what metal is now as nebulous as that is. Not really the mainstream, but you can argue that mainstream metal isn't really alive anyway. So, regardless, this is a fantastic album and you should absolutely check it out. I would say that even if you're not a particularly huge metal fan, this is accessible enough to lead you into more extreme variants of death metal or technical death metal and all of that shit. Like if you want to try, I would start here, man. This is a great album. This is one of my favorites of the year thus far. Like top five pretty easily. I adore everything about it so much. Like the even the production on the specific instruments, the way that the guitars are so bright and so saturated that they basically sound like synthesizers and they duel with each other constantly. Every idea here just it works so fucking well. Yeah, couldn't be more happy with it.
Want to throw a special shout out to the name of the Tangerine Dream guy on this, Thorsten Quaishning.
Hell
Like,
yeah, brother.
there have
Mhm.
been a lot of people in Tangerine Dream over the years. Like, you go to Germany, there's like a 1 in 6 chance that anyone you meet was in Tangerine Dream at some point. So, I just like I appreciate a good ass Tangerine Dream name. So there you go. Um, all right, let's move into Geordie Greep, the new Greep.
Creepy. The
Great.
new Greep.
That's that's a
I'm a Greep.
way better
I'm a
name.
weirdo.
That is a way better name for the album than the new sound.
You
Geordie
know?
Greep, you may, if you have been living under a rock, not know that Geordie Greep was the frontman of the English band. I was just gonna say band, not even gonna go for they were a proggy,
Musical
cool,
act.
yeah, musical act, Black Midi. They came around in the late 2010s and recently broke up after having delivered us three incredibly eclectic and strange and cool albums, two of which we've reviewed on the show. uh Cavalcade and Hellfire, both great records. But Black Midi, look, they burned bright and they shone fast. What's this saying? They burned hard and fast. They shone in the
It's
fast
not hard.
sky.
It's better to burn out than to fade
I'm
away.
good when I'm always good. Like I'm good when I'm in the middle of a review. I'm shit when I'm at the start of it. Um,
I feel like we have all been there.
So anyway, Geordie Greep, Black Midi recently disbanded on an indefinite hiatus, although it seems unlikely that they'll be getting back together anytime soon. And so we have solo projects abound. Cameron Picton has got his own solo project on the way, and of course, Geordie Greep has come storming out of gate with a solo project. Notably, a lot of these songs, I think, initially started as songs that Black Midi played live during the last year of touring that Geordie has now adapted into his solo repertoire. And boy, is this a commanding debut solo statement. I mean, they really get as in your face as this does, which makes sense for someone like Geordie Greep, right? I mean, you see that name, you see his face, you think this is a person that's going to change my life uh,
And he
in a
looks like
meaningful
he's
way.
both 25 and 50 at the same time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's that.
Sounds that way too.
He's
Mhm.
certainly singular. And look, if you had said to me ahead of this that Geordie Greep's direction for his solo debut project was going to be closer to fucking Steely Dan than like Faith No More or whatever, or Primus or whatever, then I wouldn't have believed you. But it makes total sense. Like he's a dynamic performer and he has this kind of husky sort of like I guess 19th century quality to his voice that definitely feels out of time in a lot of ways. And that I think is one of the things that makes him, not appealing to everyone, but certainly distinctive as a performer. And it's one of the things I happen to quite like about him. And he puts it to great use here, I think, because just putting aside the content and subject matter of this album, which we'll get to, as a performer, he feels like he was born to do this particular kind of like 50s loungy shtick, essentially. And what you get, especially on songs like Terra, for instance, which to me is the most Steely Dan song on this whole fucking album,
For
you,
sure.
you get him in this kind of like crooning lounge singer, but also like with the who's clearly done a lot of cocaine mode. Um, but most of the album is kind of like that persona like falling apart and going so far into the red and like peeling back the layers and revealing the broken human behind that kind of bravado, basically. And that does tie into what the album's about too. Who wants to jump in at this point and talk a little bit about the Greep and their thoughts on this exciting and strange new album?
Well, I think it's only appropriate we start this discussion with not with the album itself, but rather with one particular song, that being Holy Holy, which was the first single released very shortly after it was announced Black Midi were breaking up. And then immediately this track hits us, and the announcement of this album hits us shortly thereafter. And I think it's fair to say, especially in internet music circles, that Holy Holy was a song that just completely set the internet and us, of course, aflame, being a track that is just almost feels out the gate better than anything Black Midi have ever done. It's a stupendous eye of song, and I think the Steely Dan comparison extends probably yes a little more musically to Terra, but in terms of the songwriting conceit here, Holy Holy is just a track that feels so classic, so out of time. Like I it almost makes no sense this song and what it's about wasn't released decades ago, just for how cleverly written it is. Because for the one person listening to this video who hasn't heard the song, the conceit of Holy Holy is, of course, initially you are reading the lyrics, and it sounds like a smug womanizer kind of talking down to this woman, and all the while trying to like make himself sound a lot more smart and clever than he may actually be, only for the second half of the song to then reveal that this is, in fact, some kind of dorky incel type thing, instructions to a prostitute on how to greet and interact with him at a bar.
Mm.
So that's just I wanted to set up this song, and how do you guys feel that track sort of set your expectations and foreshadowed the rest of the album to come?
It's a great song. There's layers to it. Like the first time I heard it, I had that experience of the unfolding narrative and the fantasy sort of being revealed. But I think the more I listen to it, the more of the second time, or at least after a first couple of listens, my impression shifted somewhat to thinking that okay, I think this feels like it's about like a faded star, like someone who was really, really famous at a certain point in time, maybe is a little bit over the hill. And so that's where the sense of like everyone knows my name, you should know who I am. I have this like you have this obligation to revere me, essentially comes from. But now I think I've kind of got to the point where the song is about someone who's so deep into their fantasy that they have like that is a facade as well, that it is truly a nobody who is imagining himself as being as having this kind of rich history and celebrity, and also kind of pulling that facade down and being so insecure in their pursuit that they can't even keep that facade up, that it eventually does come crumbling. There's a lot of songs on this album that explore this idea in different ways and from different viewpoints. But this really, I can see why this was the lead single, because it feels like such a thesis statement for the commentary that this album has on masculine loneliness. And I have a broader thesis about that I'll get to in a little bit, but it definitely sets the tone in a really effective way.
So I am the person who is the least hot on this album by a significant margin, I would assume. I kind of doubt that that's all that surprising. I'm admittedly far more in the bag for the Black Midi stuff. This say what you will about this album, it holds your attention even for all of its bloated runtime. But it's sort of partially just that this whole sort of like almost like borderline yacht rock thing that's going on here is a little anathema to me. Not necessarily as a rule. I've heard Steely Dan songs that I like, you know. And I enjoy I enjoy the progressive elements. I don't know, it's really hard to explain the disconnect between this when I was as into the second Black Midi album, which was called
Cavalcade.
Cavalcade.
Cavalcade. Very different albums, but they come from a very similar set of influences. So it is difficult to explain exactly where I'm getting on there, but not getting on here for me. May just need some more time with it. It has plenty of enjoyable moments. I feel a little bit like the album tends to run together a little bit for me personally. I mean, there's nothing bad you can say about it. You know, everything here is far too musically proficient and sounds too good to really knock. I find the thematic material that permeates the album to be sort of really confronting and strange. And I don't have my head quite all the way around that yet either, but intriguing would be putting it lightly.
I think the cool thing about this is that it's just a more temped version of a lot of the stuff we found in Black Midi. It's a little bit more digestible, at least from like a broad third person perspective here. But like I was somebody who basically like Schlagenheim and I didn't really click. I liked Cavalcade more, but I didn't quite see the vision. And Hellfire, I was finally like, yes, this fucking John Zorny jazz rock shit. I'm here. And once I heard Holy Holy, I was not upset that Black Midi broke up because it seemed like they were on an upward trajectory because I was like, oh, hey, it's all of the things that I really connect with in Black Midi's music solidified into this new thing. It's different enough because I think Black Midi is noisier and more eclectic and all that, and they're a bit more, punk rock. Whereas this is just, again, it's got that tight Steely Dan-esque song construction, like Holy Holy in particular. Like this song has a 3-act structure, like fully cinematic and shit. And like musically too, like the way it evolves in like that third stretch when it had like there's all these like shimmering keys and shit. It's like, oh my God, this album sounds amazing. You don't often hear albums that sound like they had as much effort put into them as this one did. It's like there are like 30 session musicians on this album. I'm pretty sure that there's like a Brazilian band that plays on one of the songs here. It might actually be Terra now that I think about it, but there's obviously an inspiration from like Brazilian music that is showcasing in Geordie's influences. I mean, Latin music as well. Like I actually got a lot of the Mars Volta vibes, but
I
not
was going to bring them up if you
one.
didn't.
I was gonna say it's not one thing. It's like it reminds me a lot of the most recent, the Mars Volta self-titled album. It's a little bit more like again confronting and a little bit less atmospheric than that, but it's in that same sort of musical palette, but it has a little bit of the chaos of the earlier post-hardcore inclined stuff. But still, I'm just sort of astounded at how great an identity Greep has just from the outset. I love the writing on here because it is constantly throwing you for a loop. You keep having to sort of discover these portraits of men and masculinity that honestly, like most of the men characters in these songs, they're all basically variations on Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, like particularly on songs like Walk Up, for instance. Like there's clearly an image of like an executive important guy, and it's like they're lampooning these men for being shitty, and it's like, yes, cool, awesome, we love this. But what I think Greep very smartly does is that he does sprinkle in just enough humanity to humanize most of these people. Like you keep listening to Holy Holy, and then eventually, once the song takes the turn it does, you're just like, all of this is projection. And even though it's this big, bombastic, expressive thing, it's still a front of some kind. It's still sort of it's a facade that he's presenting to you. It's like it's a carnival essentially, but it's all projected from his internal insecurities. Like he's just pushing that forward out of him. And basically that's the case for most, like I think that Blues, the opener, also kind of has this too. And the storytelling is constantly engaging. But like on Walk Up, there's this one line that he'll sprinkle in there. Something like it'll basically to check your balls for lumps. It's like this guy's worried about getting testicular cancer. Like there's so many things that creep into these guys, like mortality and loneliness and all of these other things that you do identify with, but it puts it in the clothes of the most unlikable people ever, which make the tone of this and the tone of his writing feel so alive and excoriating and like fun, but never two-dimensional. And just the whole album musically is a fucking blast. There are slighter moments on here like Bongo Season that, yeah, it's not like a super well-formed, like, it doesn't have the same appeal as all the other songs on here, but I'll be damned if putting that on don't make me want to get my groove on just a tiny little bit, because it's fun. And you've got the Bongo Season. It's
There's a
fun.
beautiful, beautiful guitar interplay in that song. Like it's just gorgeous.
Oh,
Like I
dude, the
don't care
guitar
if it doesn't
interplay.
have a big, sweeping lyrical thesis. It's a lovely song to listen to.
Well, I honestly like that it doesn't have like that it's not much in the way of lyrics because like if this album just did that and didn't throw in moments like that or the title track, it feels like it would be a bit much. Like it would just be one after the other. So this breaks up everything pace-wise really well. I also really love the basically this album is phenomenal from front to back, if you ask me. But the point at which I think this really just cemented it as an album I truly loved and think that is anything like that it's the best thing that Black Midi or anyone Black Midi adjacents put out is the last four songs essentially that start with Motorbike, which Motorbike is basically what happens if you basically it's like it sounds like Michael Gira swans being thrown downstairs. Like the song just kind of devolves into a ramshackle mess, but it's also got this really insistent quality to it that I love. And then
And
you have As If Waltz, which starts off in the not waltz time signature and then gradually transitions into it. And that's a great structural choice. It's a beautiful song, and it made me come up with the comparison that I was like, album is kind of like if the most recent Father John Misty album, like if he took like way too much Adderall and then made it, because it's got that like there's like a loungy storytelling, but like the guy's a bit of a bum. Like it's got that kind of energy to it, but it's you know what? I'm not even going to speak on The Magician. Riley, I know you got shit to say about The Magician that I frankly would never do justice to.
Sure. Yeah, like just in terms of like your comparisons there, I don't want to overplay the Steely Dan one because it's like it's not it's more like the specific reference that Geordie brought up in an interview, in a great interview he did with Larry Fitzmaurice on a rowboat in Central Park, because that's how Geordie wanted to do the interview, is that he talked about his love for Donald Fagen's 1982 solo album, The Nightfly, which was the first album that Fagen made after Steely Dan dissolved in the early 80s. And that album is, in terms of the perspective of the songs and the kind of like approach of the lounge singer quality, very, there's a lot of sheer DNA there. In terms of the album, so you guys have done a great job so far, and I'm sure there'll be more as well, of describing the wonderful musical qualities of this album. Motorbike, Jake, you spoke on that beautifully. I like the swans falling down the stairs thing. To me, that's the most Black Midi sounding song on the album.
For sure.
And it's interesting as well that that's the one song which is not sung by Geordie, but is sung by Seth Evans, who's been Geordie's and Black Midi's regular producer, and also performs a lot of the instruments on this album as well. Um, the album is, its broad thesis is masculine loneliness and disenfranchisement. And this is an interesting topic because it came up recently when we talked about the new album from MJ Lenderman, Manning Fireworks, which to me is about a very similar topic and looks at it just from a very different angle to this one. Manning Fireworks looks at kind of masculine loneliness, specifically 21st century masculine loneliness, through the lens of isolation and disaffectedness, about how the way that the world fails to equip men for what the realities of living is, and how ill-fitting a traditional masculine approach is to the way that society functions now, leaves you kind of feeling really empty inside. The new sound lyrically is more like what happens when the masculine socialization essentially puts you in a position where you feel entitled to, where you've been raised to kind of feel entitled to certain things that the world isn't prepared to give you, and how you can react outward. So, okay, this is maybe a more concise way of putting it. Manning Fireworks is about, growing up and reacting inward against the world for because you don't know how to behave and how to kind of be yourself essentially because your masculinity is so fractured and you react inward. And that album to me is a vision of what that feeling is like. And whereas this is an album about reacting outward, this is an album about having a grandiose inflated ego, about narcissism, about mania as well. Um, Geordie has a kind of almost formulaic approach to a lot of these songs where he'll use a particular kind of phrase, or he'll like use a particular kind of sentence hook, essentially like you this, you that, soon this, soon that. Like he'll start a lot of lines in the same way on these songs, and essentially what they will do essentially is provide a kind of bedrock for this sort of like incessant rambling, this incessant neurotic fixation on all of these different details of life, this fully fleshed out imagined reality essentially. And then what Geordie will ultimately do is once that mania has kind of reached a fever pitch, once you've been presented with this ornate, elaborate display of this imagined fantasy, then it will kind of come crumbling down. And the loneliness that kind of sits at the core of all of that fantasy will sort of be exposed for what it is. This is done on a lot of songs on this record. It's done on the very first song on this album, Blues, which is in its own way, structurally, musically, and lyrically, a template for the album going ahead. Tira, I think, takes this even further because that to me, that's a song about being obsessed with your legacy. Not only it's not enough once that kind of hollowness sinks in, it's not enough. Like whatever you do, all the excess you engage in, all the manipulation, all the things you do to seize control aren't enough when the paralyzing fear of death and non-existence creeps up with you. And I find it really funny that a song about that paralyzing fear comes in the form of the most upbeat and jaunty and loungy jazz song on the whole album. There's a real sense of humor that Geordie has here. I could very easily go in the whole album in a row. I'll stop myself from doing that so other people have a chance to talk here as well. August, I want to hear your take at this point on the music of this album and the themes and how these sorts of things interact and what your take is on what the album's doing.
One way that kind of really struck me was just the way it's like the lyrics are written, because so rarely does this album actually follow some kind of proper rhyme scheme or structure. Like you'll be lucky to get an A B A C kind of rhyme scheme in one of these verses. And something I was kind of thinking about with that, I mean, for one could say, it's a representation of the kind of broken, fractured nature of these protagonists. But the way I kind of took it was it almost felt like an album that was written in Spanish and then kind of forced into English.
Huh.
And there's just kind of a fun, uncanny sense about a lot of the lyricism and particularly the way it's delivered. I'm thinking of on Motorbike, that third verse. The children stop their play. Housewives stop work to watch, just to see me riding away, to catch a glimpse of my brand new VMAX engine. Like the way that just completely throws off the kind of rhythm of the lyrics up to that point and subverts that rhyme, which could have very well been something like dirty and inappropriate, to again take it back to the braggadocio about the character's motorbike materialism and sense for escape. A lot of this album is, yes, interrogating these ideas of male loneliness, and I see it as just finding some kind of external vindication and it's an album that is about it's kind of seeking acceptance from others rather than finding that acceptance within yourself, and that being the thing that leads the protagonists astray consistently.
Mm,
um, and I like Through the War as an example of this, which is a very fun song that starts with this kind of military march kind of beat and evolves into a bit more of the kind of Latin proggy craziness that would be expected from this album. And all the while, it's this uh, general kind of describing all the atrocities he commits in service of a woman who doesn't love him, and despite this massive status of power he has, she ends up being something he can never grasp, and he desperately clings onto her transmitting a disease, an STD to him as some kind of last bit of control he might have over her.
yeah.
And
I love this song so much.
mhm,
This song is so funny. When I was writing, just like scribbling little occasional notes to this while I was at work the other day, I wrote down Disco Elysium ass song about this one in specific. Just like this particular portrait of what Geordie's going through, this time channeled through this like ruthless dictator, essentially who boasts about his conquests. And there's this great counterpoint that's provided where he'll get more brutal with the things that he's done, to establish himself and to kind of seize power. And he'll contrast that with like this like incredible tenderness when he describes this woman that he loves. Like he's willing, and the further apart those two things get, the funnier it is as well. Like to the point where he's talking about these sort of eating men alive and like ripping hearts out of chests or having sex with corpses or whatever, and then contrasting that with but her beauty and grace brings a smile to my face sort of shit. And it's really funny the way he does that. And that sense of humor that he uses as well, I think, is also a really subversive trick that almost disguises what I interpret to be quite a grim ending to the song as well, where it almost seems like it's not clear exactly, but there's some kind of implication that he consumes her in some way, whether physical or psychological or what, I don't know. But there's this sense that as
Nah, he ate that bitch.
yeah, yeah, basically, right? So that to me is like the way the song is written and is constructed is like to me one of the most impressive examples on the whole album.
I did want to jump on the point of just the sense of humor of this album is something that can't go overlooked. I think it's often very funny in loud ways and in quieter, subtle ways. Like for me, some of the just wacky musical choices across here just make me smile from ear to ear. Like on and to go back to Holy Holy briefly, I love the kind of doo-wop chants that happen during the song's breakdown. That
Holy,
just sends
holy.
me. It's hilarious. And I guess another line from that song I really that really tickles me. It's when he says, from the shores of Havana, from Moscow to Tokyo, in French, Guyanese, and Cantonese, everyone knows my name. The part I love about that is, what the fuck is French Guyanese? Is that even a real language? Is it
There,
just
there, there's definitely a real place called French
there's
Guiana.
I know French Guiana is a real country, but like that line just really sends me, because if that's not a real thing, that's just such a hilarious way
Um,
to convey the character just trying to sound smarter than they are by like
Yeah,
making up something that
um,
sounds vaguely real.
I'm pretty
yeah,
sure they just speak French there.
it's great. Um, well, like there's also like if you really want to probe the depths, and this is maybe getting a little over my head, but there's also like a subtext of colonization in that too that you could dig
Mhm.
into as well. I won't go there, but it's a rich text. Um,
a mythic text.
I really enamored, and Jake's already spoken to this beautifully as well with the final stretch of the album, the way that it concentrates its energy and builds to a real thematic climax as well that makes you kind of feel that a lot of the tension that's been presented on the album has kind of come to a head. And I want to talk a little bit about or at least acknowledge authorial intent and the role of the unlikable protagonist in or anti-hero or however you want to kind of characterize that in modern media as well, because it's a much discussed topic. A lot of the conversation around it, to be honest, exhausts me. I feel like a lot of the intricacies and nuances of difficult protagonists in art, I feel like a lot of those conversations were settled a long time ago, and yet they continue to be relitigated. So I want to compliment Geordie for presenting a character who, to me at least, and again, maybe your interpretation of this is a reflection of yourself to some degree, but to me, I find a certain level of distanced empathy for the character at the center of this album. And I like to think it's about a continuous character that kind of manifests in different ways, or just a continuous. I mean, it's basically about the same guy, even if it's not if that every song is about the same guy. You know what I mean? It's an archetype. But Geordie does a great way it does a great job of making them feel real and three-dimensional and human in a way that you can connect to if at a distance, while also, I think, not redeeming the character, which is, it's a choice. The first time I listened to this, I was so swept up in the awe of the song The Magician that I felt this sense of this a sense of redemption was coming through for this character, that they were kind of realizing where their endless delusions had led them. But then the more I listened to the song and the more I kind of broke down the lyrics, that's not really what's happening. It's a total manic like breakdown, and the character really only digs their heels in at this finale to the fact that the world is shit and everyone has let him down and disappointed him, and he hasn't been able to achieve any of the things he wants with any real sense of closure or continuation. That was not an intentional porcupine tree reference, but it exists. Um, anyway, so yeah, it's actually a really dark and ugly song, one of the most on the record, because you see it presents itself initially as a moment of clarity, but ultimately only becomes more confused and, you know, uh, like lacking in resolution. It's just a manic babble. Although to me, the saddest song on the album is the one that immediately precedes it, As If Waltz. This one to me really, really like sunk its teeth into me. Uh, this is one of the songs where Geordie uses that trick that I kind of alluded to earlier, where a lot of the lines sort of start with the same word. I think it's two in this case. And it's like every single proposition is like every single line is like a proposition, to have this, to want this, etc. Like an imagined thing. And it really highlights the unreality of it all. It highlights the fantasy. It highlights how imagined it all is. And then the specific aspects of this fantasy with this woman that he zeroes in on. And I should say as well that I interpret this to be a direct sequel to Holy Holy, because there's strong implications within the lyrics that the song is about a sex worker, which Holy
Yes.
Holy, I think it's actually kind of ambiguous whether Holy Holy is about a sex worker or about a woman that Geordie is asking to function in that capacity, essentially. But regardless, there's this performance element in As If Waltz that's much more self-conscious and much more kind of self-aware than it is in Holy Holy. The lyrics come from a place of, I know that this isn't real. I know that I'm imagining this, and yet this is what is happening in my brain, and this is what I want to bring into the world. And there's something so tragic about how, even though all of these demands revolve around this other woman, really none of them truly show any concern for her inner world. They're all still essentially about self-validation. And there's a tension between that reality, that fact that these are all desires of self-validation, and also that Geordie also has this clear and true adoration for her. This sense that he does have this affection that's so strong and that's so deep that to that point that he is imagining this whole life together, and yet he still can't cross this boundary of self-obsession to actually think about her internal world. It's really sad. Um, you know, I'm sure for a lot of women, it's just like, this is how a lot of men are. So there's nothing really profound about it at all. But the way that um, Geordie realizes it in such a way that you see how like pervasive the delusion is, the narcissism, and yet you also kind of feel this tugging empathy for that desire for love that he has. It's beautifully done. It's beautifully put together. Um, and yeah, and so that to me, these songs back to back, Motorbike, which also has, which Motorbike's interesting because it's kind of like a cliche embodied. It's just the guy who gets divorced and then wants to buy a Yamaha, essentially, and it's a kind of farcical vision of that of a cliche. But towards the end of it, it's what I like about it is there's this kind of seething anger under the surface of it that kind of comes to a boil at the very end of it as well. It's not just this kind of like ho-hum masculine midlife crisis thing. It's just there's also underneath this there's this simmering resentment that really kind of adds an edge to it. And I also just really love the line, "Would you love someone like me if you knew you would not get caught?" Which in isolation is kind of heartbreaking. And then in the context of the song, it's just another expression of narcissism of like, you don't love me because you care what other people would think if you were with me. But in and of itself, there's something truly tragic to that line. And then just ending with "this town is fucking" going into an extended instrumental is great. Also, As If Waltz, reaches this great climax emotionally, and then you get a shredding guitar solo. Like the songs find room for these, to remember to have these kind of moments of great musical bravado. And maybe these things are so separated, and so like maybe the lyrical indulgence and the musical indulgence are so, the go on so much essentially that the album can feel a little bit excessive. Maybe there are certain songs that kind of make redundant points. Possibly there are a couple of songs I think the album that are not bad songs, but like Walk Up, for instance, which I think the album kind of would be fine without because it sort of reinstates a point that I think I like better in a different song. But that kind of yuppie lifestyle manifestation of this masculine cartoon is still fun and funny in that song and has a great kind of climax. I don't like the skit at the end of it though. I wish they'd cut that skit, but you know.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, no, it's amazing. The decision to end with an old standard that was adopted by Frank Sinatra in the 40s as well. It's kind of a final, like brutal, sort of ironic twist of the knife, essentially, after this colossal breakdown that happens on the magician to then end with this kind of like starry-eyed fantasy. Just really, I think, to me, reinforces how little the character at the center of this has learned at all. Um, so yeah, it's a very tragic and depressing album in terms of its subject matter, and there's no redemption whatsoever for its troubled protagonist, and yet it is also one of the most fun albums of the year. So that's the magic of the Greep for you, baby. And apparently this took like a year to record this, which doesn't surprise me. There's a lot of people on this album.
Sounds like it.
Um,
And
and but
as I
Geordie said that
understand,
he's already got a lot of the material for his next record written, and he wants to record it in a week and just do the complete opposite
Jesus.
of
mm,
what he did to record this. So that might be interesting to see how that goes. But
and as I understand, you're also hearing a few of the members of Black Midi even on this album.
yeah,
So
Morgan Simpson plays drums on some of these
That's
songs
right.
as well. There's like four different drummers, I think, on this album, but he is one of them. I don't know that he plays the bongos on Bongo Season though. Whoever played the bongos on Bongo Season, bongos to you, because
Both of these albums we're reviewing have hand drums in them, and it rocks.
I mean,
Bong
more hand drums. I gotta have more hand drums.
In metal, in jazz, more of them, just in general, please.
Yeah, 100%.
bongos to you it just as easily sounds like it could be an insult.
I mean it
Like
with all the love in my heart. Bongos to everyone.
bongos to you. Jog on.
Let us know at home what you thought of either the or any of the albums we've discussed today, especially Blood Incantation and Geordie Greep. But also let us know what you think of the new Susumu Hirasawa if you've heard it. Eden, I know you're watching. Let us know what you think of the Silent Hill 2 remake, and let us know if you've gone to any great concerts lately, and if you have anything you want to add about MJ Lenderman's live show too. Had a great set
Please,
of
please,
topics to
please
discuss
do.
today. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
We'll be back again next week with more reviews and more shit posting. 100%.
And if you doubt it, you're dead wrong. You don't know what this podcast is about. But I'll tell you what this podcast is about on the send out. As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Mike's Hard Lemonade, drink on the bright side.